Right, let me just share this and see if that works. Can you see a screen? That's the
Yeah, that's
important
good.
bit. Lovely, lovely. Yeah, all I'd like to do today, and I kind of think it's important because with everyone on this call, we're kind of conscious that no one can tackle the climate emergency on their own. We have to do it in collaboration with each other, which each other as organisations we might be in, and plans we might have, and how they might overlap. So what I want to do today is just run through how we sort of got to our plan, if you like, and how we shaped it up. It took quite a lot of time to get there. It was quite a painful process, but hopefully a rewarding one. The big thing we've tried to answer, and the question I think lies at the heart of any good plan, is how do you close that gap between what you say you're going to do and what you actually end up doing? And you'd have to say that most carbon reduction plans since 1990 have kind of failed to do that in real terms because emissions just keep on rising. So our plan starts with the essential three dimensions of the climate emergency: the why, the when, and the what, which is important to get out there on paper and sorted. But then, to use a kind of baseball analogy, we feel that we have to load all three bases, being physical infrastructure, organizational process, and personal behavior change, behavioral responses. And then the really important bit is that hitting long into the heart of decision making. And this is where I think we struggled in the past. I think everyone struggles with, because there's a very strong adversary out there, and that is business as usual. Now, crucially, as I said at the beginning, we kind of feel we must extend beyond our four walls, beyond the bits we have normal control over. These are the four areas I think that we have, and most organizations that are sort of stepped into the sort of green planning, sustainability planning arena have worked with: energy, travel, waste, and goods, everything we buy, kind of thing. You can have these four. What we've certainly learned over the past 8 or 9 years with our previous plan is that none of these things on their own work. They all have to be connected, and that kind of brings you to that famous puzzle of how you join up 9 dots with 4 lines without taking your pen off the paper. Well, it goes like this, as I'm sure you all know, and that kind of brings you to that point that actually you have to step outside the 4 walls, and we have to connect up. And that's why being here is really helpful today. And I'm hoping, we can start opening the channels of how we connect up, beyond what we do here, and overlap. And I think the overlaps will go far beyond those 2 extra dots that come with the little puzzle, and into much more important territory. So I think as I go through these slides, if you could kind of bear in mind where you've been with your sustainability planning and thoughts and thinking, and how we can overlap and share things, because it's just nuts if we all try to invent the wheel or reinvent the wheel ourselves in the process. Well, starting from the beginning, I guess, we know we can all pull together in a crisis. COVID has proved that. And now there's an even bigger storm breaking out there, climate chaos. As Anne was kind of relating at the beginning, we're all very, very understanding of what that's all about, and in which pulling together is even more important. I think if the last 10, 20, 30 years has shown us anything at all, it's that there is no straightforward, unimpeded, direct path to a clear horizon, which is where we'd all like to go. I hope we will do. But what we need right now are real signs of change. Changes that are really finding that urgent route to halving carbon emissions inside 10 years and then going on to net zero 10 years after that. Now, the NHS has taken a really strong position on that and those targets, and that's really important. It recognises, I think, as it has done for many years, that climate change is ultimately a health issue. The key turning point was probably the publication right in the middle of COVID in October 2020 of delivering a net zero NHS, which is a very strong document, and that came with lots of pushes and shoves, things in our standard contract, and it's very much in what we do now. So, but as we know, time is not on our side. Flooding, heat waves, fires, land use changes here and across the whole world are hitting us directly, and all our supply chains, and the dominoes out there are definitely starting to wobble and tip. Now, any carbon reduction plan today is born into this climate emergency, and there has to be urgency in there. We have to kind of accept, and I think pretty much everyone doing this, is that the why, the when, and most of the what is known, but what's missing is the how. If you can get to the how of how we do these things, then the where and the who kind of sort themselves out. And this how is so stickily stuck inside business as usual at the moment. Our green plan is trying to unstick that, trying to free us from those confines, and that's what we're trying to do. So, what has the how meant up till now? Because clearly we've been doing things, and we've been working out how to do those things, and we've been doing some quite good work along the way. And I think typically that how has been about quick paybacks of physical infrastructure and a basic organizational awareness raising to encourage staff, patients, visitors, everyone we know, to voluntarily change behavior. And the actions have, in that sense, they kind of touched us all. It'd be hard not to be conscious of the need to do something about climate change. And I think across our site here, with what we've done, is kind of covered the whole of the site, but in only quite a shallow way. This idea of actions that are a mile wide, but only an inch deep. We've done quite a lot. We've done quite a few things. We've enjoyed doing them. We've done them fairly well. And there's a whole load of examples there of physical stuff we've done with PV, lighting, air handling units, heat pumps, transport, travel, recycling stuff, engaging staff. Taken quite a few teams through through the Green Impact Programme now, which has all gone incredibly well and been very rewarding in the process. And we've hit some quite good numbers along there. We've probably taken about roughly 3,000 tonnes of CO2 directly from our emissions here, and hit lots of other important things, if you like, sort of things to have done around waste, recycling, transport, and the basics. And we've run hard at it. We've run up those steps, and we continue to run up those steps. But there's a sense that we are running to stand still in this. And I think particularly at the hospital, and as everyone knows, the demands on hospitals continue to grow. The hospital itself is growing. From the technology side of stuff continues to burgeon, if you like. So in terms of what we save in terms of energy, it really does get eaten back out by expansion. So our response to that, and just returning to that baseball analogy, is to cover everything. And as I say, that's not just a bit of physical infrastructure on side with quick paybacks and voluntary behaviours. That's everything. That's getting into the whole remit of all the physical infrastructure, all the organisational processes, and all the behavioural responses. And then to hit long. And as I said at the beginning, hitting long means changing business as usual decision making. And this is not just about making a bit of progress. We have to buy ourselves some extra time now. I think everyone's conscious that halving our emissions inside 10 years is hugely challenging. The sooner we get on with that, we might be able to stretch that. The more we get into this, the more we start to change and find ways of changing, all the better. So what do we mean by loading the bases? Just in a little bit more detail here. As I said, up to now, we need to carry on doing these mile wide and inch deep things. They're important, they still matter, and they're still very much a part of what we do. But we need to push down deeper into what the organisation does. The multitude of choices that are made across many, many, many different roles in this place, and the thousands of things we consume day in, day out. We have to get to those. We have to really work on what we're consuming, how we're consuming it, how much we're consuming it, and who's doing it, and exactly where that's happening. Then we start to to span more. We start to think, actually, okay, we've been doing things a mile wide and an inch deep. Now we now to pick up on that published alternative to that, which is pushing down things that are an inch wide but a mile deep, that really get deep into the organization. Covering all those relevant bases, as I said, but getting full engagement, cross-departmental, and so another part of the reason of being here is that inter-partner integration we might achieve. And this idea of multidisciplinary teams, and that's just multidisciplinary, not just in the hospital, but as I say, bring people in from outside the hospital to help this process. Just before we look at this in a bit more detail, it's also worth reflecting a little bit, I think, on how we think about carbon emissions. This is our rough footprint, and it shows that the majority of our footprint is made up and is embedded in the goods and materials that we buy. Now, that figure there is very much an indicative figure. The measuring of that, as I know a lot of people on this call will know, is incredibly difficult and getting any precision. So it always comes with a huge health warning in that it's very indicative. The things that we can measure, like heating, business miles, anesthetic gases, waste, green electricity, we do, and we have a pretty accurate figure on those. But the carbon itself is awkward in lots and lots of different ways. Even if you had accurate numbers, which we never do, the carbon numbers don't really talk to people very well. A lot of what we have been doing, in terms, is out of sight and out of mind. The carbon we have saved, can you put your finger on it? Probably not. A lot of the messaging is tired and worn. I think we all know the basics of people want us to get on a bus, want us to recycle everything properly, want us to turn the lights out, that sort of stuff. And as I said before, this Scope 3 progress reporting, the embedded emissions in what we consume, is a real struggle. There's also a strong argument to say that the pressure is in the wrong place. It's being put at the end of the pipe. We're being asked to cut our emissions at the point of consumption, and actually a lot of those emissions have been introduced way beyond our control and reach in a direct way. And it admits what's sometimes called, I've been told off for calling Scope 4 emissions. I've heard the term. I find it's quite useful. It's kind of what I think of as the responsible consumer emissions. So those emissions that don't necessarily count in our pie chart there, but we can help others to avoid. And I just think they're really important. And these are basically everything that begins with the reuse, the repair, the recycling, the options for remote working and the like, and they're all really important. And we'll come back a bit more, I think, to that idea of what it means to be a responsible consumer. So currently, what's the problem? Currently, the problem is essentially this idea of a high carbon, high waste linear economy, which we're kind of wedged into. This is business as usual. Basically, it's a fossil fuel conveyor belt, and it's hugely wasteful conveyor belt. And essentially, the whole economic growth thing is based upon making this conveyor belt work faster and faster. It has a little bit of greening involved in it. There's a handful of renewables applied, and there's some very low value of recycling. But essentially, it's highly wasteful and powered by fossil fuels. And given the unfolding environmental crisis we're in, this has got to be irresponsible consumption. So the alternative, this is a working alternative. It's something that I can envision in my mind. It keeps me pretty sane. It's this idea of an economy powered by renewable energy in which nothing is ever really wasted. This is the circular economy, and it has so much going for it. As I say, it's something that I can hold in my head. I can think about what I'm doing and relate it to that model, and I can work out really whether I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing. It feels very achievable. It's got natural system written all over it, and it's as much about sufficiency as efficiency, and I think that's a really important distinction. As I say, everything. And if you do get into this, then the energy starts to drop off by default, and bringing energy down is crucial. If the demand for renewables is going to come within reach and start meeting us halfway, if you like. And you've got to say, and I think it's been proven by many people, on paper, because it's struggling to get out there more, that with this model comes well-being and business prosperity is assured. It's a proper working economic model, and we do this. Environmental responsibility just comes with it. So, and we've placed this very much at the heart of our plan. So we just need to get on a well-planned trajectory, if you like, a route from linear to circular in the next 10 years. But unfortunately, there's a great big barrier in the way, and that is business as usual. Creates a huge amount of inertia, struggles. It's a kind of a straitjacket. It limits room for maneuver because it's habit. It's well understood. It's well established. It's kind of there. We deliver our together safe, kind and excellent healthcare at the site within that model we have for years, and now we're asking to change it, and that is a big ask, a huge one. There's a lot of elements to this resistance to break down, and there's good studies out there on this. The material factors, the social factors, the individual factors, and we have to overcome those without compromising the inviolable parts of what we do as a hospital: patient care, hospital flow, capacity, staff recruitment, retention, budget constraints. They're probably the four top ones. So we have to think, well, how do we do that? And that's by reframing decision making so that it becomes a reflex to think about the whole life cost of things. It becomes a reflex to think about our behaviors in relation to a circular economy. And we can do that. We do that with those key priorities in hospital and other things like health and safety, equality and diversity. It's kind of becomes the norm in that sense. And the good news is that we know a lot of our staff are in support of this, which is really important. They want us to take urgent action. They want to do more themselves, and they want to learn how in the process. So heading long means no longer framing our carbon reduction decision making within the structures of linear economy, where the actions can often be described as only fitting where they touch. I'm sure we've heard people go, oh yeah, we've done this project, it's great, and it saves a bit of carbon over there. It wasn't designed to do that. It just happens to fit where it touches on that. Get a lot of one size fits all, where it's just do this, your carbon doesn't fit because it's not being tailored to the specific things we're consuming and how we're consuming. And responsibilities aren't shared. They tend to be focused on one or two people. And the future is still discounted when actually the opposite is probably true. So just on that one then. So moving on in terms of what we want it to be, and this is if we really want to hit long, we need to frame decisions differently, and that's bringing in life cycle thinking, which is the whole life thinking of what we're consuming. And it means this idea of connecting budgets is so crucial. Basically connecting our current capital with a potentially incalculably huge cost of what we'll be paying in 10 years time, which climate chaos kicks in. So it's saying, well, capital today this much, revenue tomorrow huge. Let's bring those two budgets together. Let's pay for what we need to pay for today out of what will otherwise be a huge cost tomorrow. And this devolving responsibility to the point of consumption as close as possible. It's at that point that people really understand what they're consuming. And our green plan, is looking to do that. It's closing this say-do gap by recognizing every aspect and then reframing every decision. And we do that across 50 actions. It's called our Action 50 Green Plan. So unsurprisingly, there's 50 actions in there. And we divide those up into 4 sets. Set 1 is probably the most important, is about engaging the organization in making this happen. Set 2 is about immediately finding that 10% saving in direct emissions. And that means actually really finding them and not just kind of sitting back and hoping the grid gets greener so that our electricity emissions drop as a consequence. Then set 3 are those broader actions that are going to be really important to carry on with the build now and carry on as our springboard to our 50% cut inside 10 years. And then that 4th set are kind of those deep set changes towards real circularity, those ones that start to really move us towards that circular economy, joining things up in that circular fashion. And we've got some good examples out there of what we've done and what we've been doing, and just breaking these down into the scope 1, those direct emissions. We're doing an awful lot of work at the moment, and in a really strong way. We've got a really powerful multidisciplinary team looking at our consumption of nitrous oxide and trying to work out how we can reduce the emission of that to atmosphere and the losses to atmosphere, because it is, as I'm sure everyone knows, it's a very powerful greenhouse gas. In terms of Scope 2, we working with the county council and our estates team, and we had to work with the legal people, and again bringing together that combined team to connect us up to receive the surplus power that's going to be available in a reasonable volume from the new Babraham Park and Ride solar array. That's going to be these carports above the parking spaces. They've started work on that now, which is great. So we're hoping by summer next year we'll be very close to receiving good quality and renewable energy from that. Then Scope 3, these emissions that are kind of embedded in everything we buy, and again, this comes from having a very strong, motivated clinician that really wanted to help us make this happen. It's a young chap here, and he went out there and basically convinced his boss that actually we should move from single-use to reusable gowns, and the work Henry did, we would really still be struggling if he hadn't put this work in, and brought other people with him, and because there were plenty of people that wanted to do this. Then on Scope 4, these the avoided emissions, if you like. We like people to cycle to work. We can help them do that by if they come here and they've got a flat tire or something's happened to the brakes, they can get literally an instant fix here at the cycle hub we've got on site. And if they need service or whatever, it keeps them on the road. It keeps these emissions in commuting avoided, which is great. Plus we also work with Voy, and that's going well in terms of bringing people on and off site with electric bicycles and electric scooters. And we've got a couple of DIY poles if people need to fix their bike kind of out of hours, if you like. And then bringing that all together, we tackle all 4 scopes in a lot of detail in the 2 new buildings we're putting up on site, the new Cambridge Children's Hospital and the new Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital. And there is incredible multidisciplinary team working going on in the designs and bringing forward those designs into tender in that process. So I think I'll just finish by remember, this is an emergency, and in an emergency, a gap between what we say and what we do is fatal. The climate safe future is there, but we really do need to get into, as I say, covering all those bases, recognizing all the aspects, and organizational processes are so hugely important and so difficult to get at sometimes, and keep working on those behavioral responses as we keep working on the physical infrastructure. And then the all important bit of reframing every decision to change from business as usual as it is towards that renewably powered circular economy. And that's all important. And I'd love to get back to this idea of what all the partners in CNC can do, and if people that and connections with who maybe have got green plans, are writing green plans, just to see what we can stand to overlap in this, because we don't want to keep reinventing stuff. And I can often sense the things that we can overlap with around infrastructure, about processes and behaviors and sharing stuff. So on that, I will stop. But thanks ever so much for listening, and I'm really happy to take any questions at all. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. That's really interesting. And if anybody who has questions would like to put them in chat, and then we can take them in turn and discuss them, or equally suggestions for things that can be done, particularly to join the dots beyond the organisation, as Richard says. Richard, maybe if you stop sharing, then it's easier for everybody to see.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there we go. Press that button. Yeah. That's better.
Yeah.
That's better.
So the first question we have from Wookie. Do you want to ask it, Wookie? Or it's a comment, really?
Yeah, well, I just turned it into a question, I guess. As you said, there's all these hard things we have to fix, but just the cycling facilities on the whole site are generally at best mediocre, if not terrible. And that seems like something we ought to be able to fix. So what does it take to make that, for example, cycle parking a first-class thing? We can build brand new car parks, but most of the cycle parking's shoddy.
Well, we are working as hard as we can to improve it. We've got about 2,100 dedicated cycle slots on our bit of the campus. I think, and frankly, we're still currently below that, but we know if we get back up to pre-COVID levels, so we are trying to add to it. We're improving security. With some, we've got some GCP grant to do that, which is a strong thing, and we will be adding probably about another 50 spaces in the rest of this year. So I think capacity-wise, we're not too bad. Obviously, the location is not always where people want it. Everyone wants the cycle parking right outside the front door. But I think once you get used to where you want to park, it's okay. We've got a reasonable proportion of secure parking for staff. I think the bit we're working hardest on is trying to improve some of the routes, because, you know, as you say, anyone coming onto this site, it's not a very permeable site. You have to take some pretty circuitous routes to get from one side to the other. We are working on that and basically trying to avoid the big roundabout at the front, so that there are routes onto site. That means people approaching those can come off onto site. We've already got Red Cross Lane. That's quite a good entrance now there, and we're working on the other side up by the surface car park on the other side. And obviously we've got the genome path coming in, and we've got the route over the guided bus. So I'd probably take a slightly more positive view on it, but we are constantly trying to improve it, because we know how important it is, and obviously working with GCP on their projects as well. They recognise this site as an important one in terms of getting people to and from.
Next question I'll give to James, because I know he's got to zoom off any moment to go and do some teaching.
So I put two there, and can I ask them both quickly?
Yeah, absolutely, okay? Absolutely.
So thanks, Richard. That was great. Two thoughts that I had. One was just about your carbon targets, just to clarify, because you were talking about 50% in 10 years. And in my head, I've got this sort of 80% in 10 years, which is the greener NHS ones. Is that just different baselines, or are you talking about something a bit different?
Yeah, they are different baselines. Thankfully, because the 80% is based upon that 1990 baseline, and frankly, a 1990 baseline is not good to anyone, because no one knows what they were emitting in 1990, really, especially we don't, definitely. But they were rebaselined to 2019, and that's where I get the general halve it inside 10 years, which actually also aligns with IPCC and pretty much everything else. And then trying to hit, then we're down to hit net zero by 2045 or 2040 for our direct emissions. But I just try to keep it simple. There's a halve it in 10, net zero 10 after that. I can remember that one more easily.
Okay, and then I put another question there, which was me with my GP hat on, thinking about primary care, because the circular economy stuff, although it's hard to visualize, you perhaps can visualize it with something as big as Addenbrookes, but then when you take something small like a GP surgery, and so I wondered if you saw Addenbrookes becoming a bit of a sort of like a hub for the whole healthcare system when it came to sort of circular economy.
We'd love to do that, and I think that's where I'm hoping the ICS can come in and help us join those dots. I think
you should probably clarify what ICS is.
Sorry, the integrated care system, which is the Cambridge and Peterborough integrated care system. There's 5/6 integrated care systems across the eastern region, and they basically formally came into being at the beginning of this financial year. Cambridge and Peterborough now got their own green plan, and we're just trying to make sure that we lock into that. But the great thing about the ICS is that they bring primary care in, they bring the local authorities in. They're basically trying to ensure prevention is as much a part of this, and aftercare is as much a part of this as the individual parts. So I would think even a GP is just trying to have that whole life thinking about everything we come to consume is am I comfortable where this has come from? Am I comfortable with how I'm using it? And am I comfortable with how I'm throwing it away from that kind of carbon environmental way? And that's the decision-making side. I guess that applies to everyone. It's just trying to share it so that we share the pain and the pleasure of trying to do something about it.
Thank you.
Elizabeth May, you had a good question about biodiversity and water. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Hello, good morning. I'm sorry it's a bit late arriving, but anyway. I'm a bit worried about this continued huge expansion of the hospital area and how it's moving onto green land. I'm also worried about the lack of water in the area. Are you doing anything to capture water, recycle water, look after the biodiversity on your land?
Yes, we are. We're actually, it's surprising because when you come onto the campus as it is, it always feels like a bit of a concrete desert. But it is surprising how much, even their biodiversity we have. But clearly it's going to struggle. We do have plans to try to improve it within the space we have, but a lot of that is concrete. The new builds are taking it very seriously, and that's helped by trying to achieve the top level of the sort of building building standards, if you like, which make biodiversity very important. In terms of water, it's difficult in hospitals to do grey water recycling, but I know on both, definitely on children's, we're trying to ensure that we've got rainwater harvesting, so that at least we can use that to for irrigation in the grounds that we have. So it's always going to be quite hard work, but we are doing, I think, probably the best we can. And we do now have ecology. One thing, the new standards, it brings ecologists onto site, which has been a helpful process.
Thank you. I've got another question, but I'll let Anne. She's got other people asking questions, so I'll put this one in, and then.
That's great. That's great. So the next question is about pharmaceuticals, and I was Ian has put in put a question about this as to why the embedded carbon from pharmaceuticals is so high. What percentage of the total is it? And I'm also interested in what can we do about it, because it does seem to me that particularly when you get to pharmaceuticals being prescribed in the community, there's a lot of waste.
It's incredibly difficult. I think you've got to bear in mind that, as I mentioned, all those embedded carbon footprints come with a huge health warning. The emission factors we use are tied to spend, so they're kind of economic emissions factors. So basically, you just get a big lump that says pharmaceuticals, this much carbon per pound spent, and you can imagine how coarse that is in terms of coming up with a number, but it points us in the right direction. I know our pharmacy department are very good. We reclaim as much unused pharmaceutical as possible, and reuse as much as we can. The packaging, pharmaceutical packaging, as you imagine, is a bit of a nightmare, and we're trying to improve that. It's just something you have to keep scratching at, but we need more and more clinical support in helping us to do this, and the range, within the greener NHS targets, two of the key things to look at, and James Gone, because he's a real expert on it, is around the metered dose inhalers, because the propellant in there is it's got a very high global warming potential, and just the numbers of different types of inhaler, and just trying to separate those is phenomenal. And we're trying to get together that multidisciplinary group that can bring in the clinical skills, because historically this sort of work is stuck in estates and has been for many years, and we need to take it out of estates and get all, as I say, that devolved responsibility, that buy-in across clinicians. And I'm really excited about trying to get that group together, and I think once we can and it starts to get purchased, that's great. One of the biggest challenges I think we have is that all these clinicians are obviously doing very busy jobs already with huge numbers of other priorities. So trying to find some protected time where they can focus on these issues is part of this engaging with the organisation, and that's something we'll be pressing for. Some hospitals have managed to get fellowships, which are all good, but you can kind of get someone who works almost part-time on sustainability issues in particular areas. But you're absolutely right, pharmaceuticals is a huge area. If you think of anesthetic gases as pharmaceuticals, that's another priority area for us, and we are going to make good ground on that within 12 months. So again, that comes down to getting the right team together, but being able to focus on Entonox, nitrous and desflurane. It's just three things, but you can imagine how long the list is when you're covering all the pharmaceuticals. Yeah. Sorry, it's not a very clear answer, but it's definitely a work in progress.
I was wondering about pharmaceuticals in the community, partly because when my mum was in her last days, we had just was apparently called a just in case pack of some rather expensive drugs, and then when she, as one might say, no longer needed them, I tried to take them back to the pharmacy and was told I couldn't because they'd been in her sitting on top of her kitchen cupboards, and so who knows what might have happened, so they had to be thrown away, which seemed to me a complete waste of money and everything else. Surely there could have been some way of putting them in a Tupperware box or something so that they were safe. But anyhow,
I think that's kind of one where having our integrated care system and joining the dots in there is a real opportunity.
Okay, great. And the next question I think is I'll put one in from Cambridge Sustainable Food, who are very interested to know when the procurement contracts for the Children's Hospital are nearing an end, and how we can work to influence shorter supply chains to help on the more sustainable food side of things.
Yes, it's pretty excited about what we might manage there. Obviously, if we can bring in local, fresh, seasonal food, because it'll have, my understanding, and I hope it stays, it will have its own kitchen. At the moment, we don't really have kitchens on site. We just have sort of reheat facilities, so we end up with a contract that's difficult from a sustainability point of view. So it's moving forward. And in fact, we were discussing, because we're trying to get a kind of passive house accreditation for the new children's hospital, and actually having a kitchen brings a whole host of additional things. Obviously, a kitchen is typically quite energy intensive, again, with a lot of ventilation. So we've been working out what we need in order to hit the passive house targets. So it's a big plus. It keeps moving, and you just have to keep hoping it continues to move in that direction of us having a really good, highly energy efficient kitchen that brings in local, sustainable food.
And when are the procurement contracts for that coming to an end? And so, and how can the community help?
I've already made a little bit of a connection with, and this was early on in the process, but we're moving into that detailed design stage, the stage 3, and at that point, you're starting to really spec out in detail what you want, because that's what you're going to take to market. So we're at the beginning of that stage 3 process.
Okay, thank you. Right. Sorry, I was too focused on the interesting questions rather than looking at what was in chat. So what about the embodied carbon, in particular concrete and other building materials? I think you mentioned to me when we were talking earlier that unusually in your decarbonisation plan, you're actually including the embodied carbon things that you're buying and using.
Yes. I suppose the biggest thing we're trying to do on that is, with the new builds, we're looking to see if we can use the fly ash from the incinerator as part of actual aggregate, which feels wonderfully circular to me. There's obviously quite a few steps involved, and it comes down to how much that's got to be treated. But that's a plus. We have got all the materials aspects, again, using the building research establishments, environmental, the BREEAM status, the BREEAM requirements, and trying to hit as high as possible on those helps considerably with our choice of materials and our procurement process. So it is in there, and we will be doing everything we can. It's harder to do in the sort of backlog maintenance side, the refurbishment side of the existing hospital. It's just difficult in those situations to do that much. But in the new build, it's definitely high on the agenda.
Okay, I don't think there are more questions in chat unless I've missed them. So has anybody got anything else they would like to ask, or comments they would like to make, particularly, bright ideas as to what we can do to help decarbonise both Addenbrookes and Rosy and ourselves? Isabella.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was a very interesting presentation, and you are thinking actually about loads of things which other people are not really considering. And especially that circularity thinking is really critical. For that, of course, you would need to really work closely with your suppliers, including suppliers of medicines and equipment, so they understand how do you use those, how do you dispose of, what can you they should be taking back and assume responsibility for those. So my question, I think, is how do you keep in touch with the bigger NHS, because there are many overlapping things with other hospitals. So you finding out those pharmaceuticals, what is the real emission factor, is not really something you should be doing on your own. It will affect other hospitals. So are you in touch with other hospitals and with your suppliers as well?
Yes, I think we do communicate quite a lot between other hospitals. We're part of a group called the Shelford Group of Hospitals, and then there's a wider collaboration hub that's out there that allows us to share information. I would say on the emissions factors, we could spend the next 20 years trying to get emissions factors right and specific. I don't think it's worthwhile. I think it's better for us to think of ourselves as, well, how do we become a responsible consumer once we've got it, which is about trying to say, well, if we're going to have something, can we please have something that has got as little packaging on it possible in the first place, and that we know how to dispose of once we've used it, and ideally can use it and repair it and refurbish it ourselves as many times as possible. It's setting those things on rather than necessarily asking about the carbon per se. In terms of our suppliers, thankfully, at the beginning of this year, April 2022, the NHS kicked off this sustainable supplier roadmap. And basically, there's different ways we will be working closer and closer with our suppliers. From the 1st of April this year, all the tenders we put out now have to include a 10% for social value in their assessment processes. And I've been basically putting in, and that includes a big chunk about net zero. So I've been basically asking all our suppliers of these tenders, well, please tell me about the carbon footprint of what you're giving us and the waste footprint of what you're giving us and its resilience to the impacts of climate change. Tell us what the baseline is and tell us how you're going to help working with us on improving each of those things. To start with, it's very scary for them, but I've said in each one, you know, when you're not doing this on your own, we're collaboratively working on this, and once you get into that discussion, things get much more comfortable, and you can see that they do want to do it, and actually a lot of them are very keen because it helps them improve their products, it helps improve their marketing if they're circularizing what they're doing, and I think as of April next year, I think any one providing tenders contracts over £5 million, they will have to have their own in effect green plan for their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that needs to align with the NHS targets. And then the year after that, it starts becoming all suppliers will need to have a green plan aligned with our targets. So it's that kind of pushing the message back up the chain to say, you know, we only want to work with people who are setting the same targets for their scope 1 and their scope 2, because our scope 3 emissions are really just everyone upstream scope 1 and scope 2 emissions just lumped together and as a growing snowball that ends up in our goods inward, and we just need that snowball to get smaller and smaller.
I think it's just a quick comment. I think there might be a potential collaboration point here because I'm working with UCL hospitals developing scope 3 greenhouse gas calculator tools. So they understand better where those emissions are coming from, where is the need for much more detailed emission factors. I think we can share where we are at and see if we can progress something in collaboration. Yeah,
that would be great. Lovely. Thanks, Isabella. Thank you.
We've got a few more questions, and it'd be lovely to continue discussion. But I don't know, Richard, are you going to be able to stay any longer, or have you got to?
I can stick around for a bit longer. You know, it's just these opportunities don't arise very often.
Okay, that's great. But I think because I know that some people probably have to leave at 1, we can continue discussing things until about 1:30. But I wanted to formally thank Richard for such a fantastic talk and stimulating a really interesting discussion. Yeah, so
thank you. It's very kind.
Applause don't really work very well over Zoom, but we do our best, Richard. And what we'd kind of like to do is finishing these AGM sessions, just give anybody an opportunity if there's anything coming up that they want to share. Obviously, it's quite a busy time climate-wise over the next few weeks. Just give it a slot to people to briefly share things that are coming up, and then we'll resume the discussion with Richard. Has anybody got anything that they'd like to share that's coming up? There's quite an exciting Cambridge Sustainable Food have got really quite an exciting Healthy Food, Healthy Planet festival coming up, which starts, it's all this week, and it culminates at the Museum of Technology on Saturday, of which we're part. But there's going to be loads of food and fun things there. Tom, I think you've got something?
Yeah, so from November, Cambridge Carbon Footprint will be running our thermal imaging scheme, where you can have free online training to see how, particularly on how to interpret the pretty pictures that you can get. And then when you've got that, then you can book to borrow a camera. We're hoping to have 9 thermal imaging cameras to lend out from volunteer hosts who are across Cambridge City and South Cambs. And it's really good for finding where your home is leaking heat, or indeed, we hope, maybe you'll take it to other people's homes or community buildings.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody with anything else? Okay, let's finish the formal session, but we'll now continue the discussion. Richard Townley, you have a question for Richard Hales.
Yes, Richard. Again, I would give my thanks for a very, very interesting talk and telling us a lot about the hospital site. One thing I think you haven't talked about is the travel by patients and visitors to the site, and in particular, the difficulties of such a large site of how to cross it. Particularly, was going to be a new station on one side and the bus station on the other. It seems to me that the only way to connect is to walk, although there is potentially an internal bus service which doesn't seem to operate. Are there any proposals to try and put something more up to date and which has zero emissions in place?
Yes. Sorry. I think obviously the railway station should be a bit of a game changer when that arrives. But as you say, it's the other side of the site from the bus station. We're very conscious that we need to rethink bus circulation around the site. That bus station which came in the 90s was, again, that in itself was a game changer. That that brought gave so many more people access to the site. As I sort of mentioned on the cycling front, we all know how difficult it is to get from one side to the other. If you go up the main drive, you just find yourself hemmed in, and the only way is to go through the hospital, which is a nightmare if you don't know it. I think we did have a plan at one point to actually ensure the main drive actually carried on and joined up with the road the other side of the sort of cafeteria retail block that sits in the middle there. I'm not sure that's still on the table as it stands, but it's a constantly evolving thing. I mean, we do have the 2 electric courtesy buses now, and we have got 2 of them now, and so people should be able to use those if they need to move around or moving around is difficult. And they both take wheelchairs, so that's a plus. But there is no getting away from the fact, I suppose, that this site has developed over a long period of time, and it's a very big site. Even if you know your way, just getting from one side to the other is going to take you 20 minutes easily, and that's walking quite briskly. So all I can say is it is a constant work in progress to try to ensure that the wayfinding and the surfaces are good and ensure that access. As I said, we've now got the 2 courtesy buses and they are both electric, which is a plus. And the arrival of the railway station will certainly reshape the gravity, if you like, of the site and how that gets managed. We're just a partner in that part. We have a bit more control over the bus station because it's our land. But again, those buses will shift as that comes on to try to make sure that we're connecting people up. But it is high on our list of things to constantly, and we know it's not going to stand still. It's like the cycling; it's not going to stand still. We have to keep working on it. But it's there, and we do have a Cambridge Biomedical Campus Transport and Travel Group, and that's really important because it's not just the hospital that's affected. It's AstraZeneca, it's the university, it's ABCAM, it's Papworth. They've all got the same issues with getting around as us. So not a great answer, but it's a bit of an answer.
One thing I was wondering about comes back to the question about food, and we've been discussing the problems of getting sort of really sort of healthy, tasty food being served to patients in hospital is as you mentioned to me, is quite a challenge. And I mean, maybe you want to discuss a little bit what one could do about that, or if anything. And I was also wondering whether there's opportunities to help encourage basically the visitors and staff and everybody else who passes through the hospital to basically learn how to cook in a sort of healthy, low cost way, using real ingredients, which an awful lot of people never learned how to do.
Yep.
And many of us would have had an experience of quite long periods of sitting around in hospital while our nearest and dearest are there.
Yeah, no, I mean, getting, as I say, we have a contract supplier for the food that comes in for the patient catering, and that will come up for renewal, I think, probably within the next 2 years. But finding someone that can fit with the infrastructure that we have, which, as I say, is not an individual preparation kitchen infrastructure, is always going to be difficult. And meeting the volumes that we need requires a big contract. So that's slightly problematic. But I do think at the moment, in terms of sort of the concourse and the food court areas, where there is, there's a lot of retail, there's a lot of food. Again, the contract for that will eventually come up, and we will be able to change it more. But it was a long-term contract put in place some while back. It's got some distance yet to go. I think things have improved a bit, although obviously we still have some outlets that people would not like to see. And Marks is just incredibly popular, but it's got a lot of convenient stuff in there. It's got a lot of packaging. If we could find a space to bring other food on site, we did, 4 or 5 years ago, have an experiment with Duncan at Cofco, trying to get boxes bought on site, but it just logistically could not make it work. It was just too difficult. But I'm interested to talk to Duncan again to see if that was a while back now, and to see if there's any way we can try to offer that. So I think if you're getting seasonal fresh food and vegetables, you are preparing from scratch, and it just encourages that process of cooking for yourself and trying to step away from all this horrible process stuff.
What's the problem that there's sort of not space in the hospital? I mean, I kind of imagine that there must be loads of sort of spare rooms available to make things happen in, but
there aren't really. Surprising, space is at such a premium, and the retail space is all under contract at the moment, and there's not a great deal we can do about that. It was a bit of an issue trying to get Duncan's boxes on site, but it's certainly something we will revisit, because it is such a big part of this whole process, and totally open to anyone that's got any bright ideas that we can then float upwards and say, how about this? Very, very open.
Maybe it's a shelter in the car park or something. Claire, you're muted.
I just really wanted to I'm not going to go on about it, but I just posted this wonderful piece that was recorded with the food programme, the Sheffield Training Hospital. It's really phenomenal, and they're working with Food for Life, who is the Soil Association organisation, and they're doing huge things with procurement. And I know Cambridge Sustainable Food, they've already are going for their gold award, and so we should really be starting with them, and we'll begin to work with them as well. And there are so many farmers that are very keen locally to bring agroecological and decent food in, and just to try and keep your pharmaceutical bills down. If you get your people going out healthier, then you'd hope that and I know the NHS are looking at this as a whole, because we've got to do more preventative medicine, and where fossil fuels will run out, what are we going to give everyone when they're ill? But food, we'd have to keep growing. So from the heart, I hope that could be a centerpiece.
Yeah, that's totally great. Thanks for that link. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? I'm not seeing them in the chat, but do stick your hand up. Yeah, your hand is still up. I assume that's a hangover.
How do I put my hand up? Never mind, I've got a question.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, Richard, to go back to that thing about the through route through the middle, which obviously would be game changing, and was in the 2020 vision thing, as you said. I mean, who decides such a thing? Because you've got to knock something down, there's some department has to go or move or whatever to actually make that happen. And what will be the process to decide that was in fact the way to go? Who gets to choose?
Well, we are in the process, although I haven't seen the final version. There is a new master plan being drafted, because obviously then that's on this shift from thinking of the current site as Addenbrookes 2, with Addenbrookes 1 being down by Fitzwilliam, and moving towards Addenbrookes 3, and that's kind of shifting the site, if you like, southwest, because obviously we've got Children's Hospital going on also opposite the Rosy, and then we've got the new Cancer Research Hospital going kind of opposite the ATC. The ATC is obviously still quite new, and the newer build is that end. And then it's thinking about, well, what buildings might we like to keep and how might we choose to keep them? And that's a really tricky question, and it is one that, we're asking from an energy perspective, because, we're in the process of, and by the end of March, we should have a sort of heat decarbonisation plan for the site, which is quite a struggle. I mean, the whole site at the moment is heated by a big steam main from the gas boilers in the boiler house, and that's that's a campus-wide infrastructure, and coming away from campus-wide infrastructure is quite difficult, but that's why we're going to have this plan, and all these things will affect in time the layout of the site. So I don't think at the moment we've got that fixed master plan, because there are too many dynamic elements out there at the moment that we're trying to tackle, of which decarbonisation is a big one. But I'm thinking that hopefully within 2 years we will have that plan, but a lot will hinge on how you use the new builds and how they relate to the existing, and I'm not party to where that's settling at the moment, although I'm trying to feed in this sort of energy side, to ensure that we can heat and cool the site in as low a carbon way as possible, basically by not burning any gas on site, because the two new prop builds, they'll both be electric.
The sort of front road, and then you build some buildings around it, and then you end up with no through route by the time you finish building your things. And now we're kind of developing, if we put a hospital the other side of Robinson Way and fill in that bit, you still potentially end up with no through route, because we've got the existing roads, which mostly don't have decent cycle facilities because of the kind of private way they got built. We could end up with a slightly bigger site that fundamentally has the same problems as the one we've got now. There is more thought going into this, but as you say, it's a hard problem however you run at it. And because CampCycle's got some really interesting ideas about like what to do about the roundabout of death outside, and redesign that whole area. If you got rid of the car park, you could rearrange that whole front section with the double roundabouts of Doom and the bus station and make something much better. But that's a big thing, and somebody has to spend some money.
It is a big thing.
Know anyone about that internally, and whose land it is, and all these questions. I guess the question will be how input into that from obviously with the cycling expertise hat is the particular bit I know about, but you need to talk to the bus people and everyone else.
We just internally here, we've sketched out the radical change that you could do at the front there, but as you say, land ownership's an issue. A big part of it is not our sort of stop with the bus station and then the flagpole roundabout, but down from there to the main roundabout is not us. But we would desperately, like I say, at the moment we're just working on trying to prevent cyclists and pedestrians even having to get to that point by pulling them off Babraham Road and Hills Road before they get there. But that doesn't really help if you're going across towards Queen Edith. So it is a problem.
Like as Tess pointed out, the map that you get from the hospital that says come and attend your appointment doesn't even have the Red Cross lane access on it. No such thing. The cycleways are just missing from the map. At least the one we got last week. Yeah, it was embarrassing.
That is, because the one, I know the last one I looked at did, but maybe I'll double check that. Thanks for pointing that out.
I could send you, I'll see if I can look at where it came.
Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Very nice. Near term, easy, quick win, low hanging fruit, possibly. People sending out the wrong map. So, Richard, are there any things that are sort of on your mind as sort of gleams in the eye where maybe the community could help, or you could help the community decarbonise? So, in the spirit of working together to help accelerate this decarbonisation.
I suppose the kind of the two things that always spring to my mind is trying to have local recycling, reuse, repair centres, because we, you kind of feel that a lot of stuff that gets disposed of, could be dismantled locally and broken down into proper recycling streams that then have a real value. But someone's got to do that work. If it's kind of done on a not-for-profit basis, so everyone's, you're getting a good living out of doing it, but you're doing it locally enough. Kind of a little bit, I suppose, like Emmaus does, but one that actually breaks things down more rather than trying to sell stuff on. If we had those sort of things, and then big organizations, you've got stuff that is, you can't necessarily reuse it as it is because it's kind of shot, but you should still be able to dismantle it. And it's this idea of just putting pressure on ensuring the stuff that we do get, we can sensibly recycle, and having a facility to do that. Because the facilities at the moment that we have used for recycling are essentially domestic facilities, which is the same as you would have at home. There's very little out there that's specifically for healthcare, which is a problem in itself. I suppose the other side is just thinking about this whole engagement side, this whole, how do we engage a whole population with wanting to move from that linear, rapidly fossil fuel powered conveyor belt to circularity, and how we can have a shared approach to doing that. I mean, we're trying to put together learning packages and the like, but if they're more embedded across the whole of Greater Cambridge, then it becomes a really exciting thing. And it's about how we create the change. I think, as kept saying, everyone knows the why, the when, and the what. That's all out there, but the how is still desperately difficult. And you kind of feel, if we could just share what circular economy means. I know in Cambridge they have, there was a circular Cambridge, and then the Judge Business School has its circular unit, and I know the University's Institute of Manufacturing are doing something along those lines, and we try to hook into that. But trying to come up with that model of how we're going to do it, rather than just picking off initiatives that are basically part of the linear economy, is kind of feels like there's a lot of room to put together that bigger vision for Cambridge as a whole, and Greater Cambridge as well. So,
do you have repair cafes at Addenbrookes side?
We haven't run one here, and again, we probably could do. It faces a bit of an issue, and getting people in at certain times is a bit of an issue. But it's certainly something that's been on my list of things that we could do. But then if they're running in the community, then that's probably fine too. I don't want to create duplications just for the sake of saying that we ran a repair cafe, when actually it's, you're doing a great job out there in the community, and
yeah, there's certainly a very big network of the repair cafe network, which I think that's another way of making it possibly more accessible in the hospital. But then maybe it makes it less accessible because it's a pain to get there.
It can be.
Yeah, sometimes not. I think the thing about sort of setting up a way of actually breaking down and repairing and reusing sort of the material that's no longer
and everything. Yeah.
Can you give some examples of the sorts of things? I mean, is this wonky beds or computers or what?
Often it's it can be bits of damaged furniture. It can be anything, I would say, that's going in one of our recycling compactors, and often is made of parts. There'll be equipment that comes out that couldn't be used by anyone else in its state, but if there was someone to break it down, and we would, I kind of feel we would just be feeding. It's kind of the safety net that sits underneath your reuse, repair, and elements, and then you need a strong recycling element. And there must be hundreds of organisations that have things. Think, well, what are we going to do with that? It's not worth anyone to any of the state it's in, but it's made up of lots of good things. And just being able to dismantle them, put them in streams. We found there was someone that did this for furniture, and they did it really, really well. But they were based up north somewhere. I forget exactly where. The cost of doing it was on a par with what we paid to have stuff taken away, but as soon as you put the transport cost in, it made it impossible. And that's what made me think, if you had this network of where we were genuinely circulating good segregated materials, and it was available to everyone, you could really start to turn the corner.
feels to me like it would be a great project for some people from either the project for the Judge Business School students or for the engineering department, materials people, some of Jonathan Allwood's crew. To basically sort of look into it and the practicalities and the values of the potential schemes and stuff. Then if there is actually the germ of a viable business there.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we know a lot of our waste goes abroad and is picked apart abroad in terrible conditions, and that it shouldn't be happening, really.
Yeah. Well, I don't. Have we got any final questions for Richard? Oh. Okay. Well, I think that's seems that we've come to an end. So thank you very much again, Richard, for your time. That's a really discussion.
Pleasure.
I'm planning to put this on recording. We're recording this, and so with any luck, it will be available on our website shortly, and I'll send everybody the link and do this.
Lovely. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, everybody.
So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.